Hello, my name's Vince Sheehan and I'd like to talk to you today about Tchaikovsky's 6th Symphony, the Pathetique. And I'd like to focus in particular on the structure of this famous symphony. I'd like to look at each of the four movements and analyse their form, because I do believe that having an appreciation of musical structure can greatly enhance our enjoyment and understanding of classical music. Tchaikovsky wrote his last symphony, in 1893, between February and August of that year. It was dedicated to his nephew, whom he nicknamed Bob. I think his real name was Vladimir, and it was premiered in October of that year, with Tchaikovsky himself conducting in St. Petersburg. Famously, Tchaikovsky died 8 days after the premiere. He drank some unboiled water and he died of cholera. And that fact has always coloured the public's perception of this symphony. Indeed, from its second performance, just a few weeks after his death, some have viewed it to be some kind of musical suicide note, or some tragic exploration of his depressive and anxious mind, perhaps even about the shame he may have experienced as being gay in a openly intolerant society and time, of course. All of these things may be true or not, and you can make your own mind up. There's plenty of information online about the extra musical baggage associated with this symphony. And indeed the symphony is about something. Tchaikovsky himself said it had a programme. He just didn't share that with us exactly. Indeed, he called it the programme symphony to begin with. But I'd like to just focus on the music itself. And I'd like to start at the beginning, the first movement, which is a sonata form movement. The whole symphony's in B minor, but this movement actually begins in E minor with the famous introduction with the bassoon, which comes out from the depths of the orchestra, the solo bassoon. It always reminds me perhaps of Psalm 130, the De Profundis, out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. And we hear this solemn bassoon right at the beginning. Eventually we get to the first subject, which is played to begin with in the violas, subdivided. We're in B minor now. But that's the first subject. That builds up a head of steam. We have this brass, brassy climax, and then the music dies away, and we reach the second subject, which is in D major, the relative major, and it's a typically beautiful Tchaikovskyan melody in string octaves, as he often scored these melodies. also a corresponding rising scalic idea as well in the second subject, which goes like this. Scales play a big part in this symphony. There's a video on YouTube of Leonard Bernstein talking about this symphony, and he makes a compelling case for most of the melodic material in this symphony actually purely being really ascending and descending scales in character. Check that out, it's really good. The second subject then returns to the opening beautiful melody, and it dies away to 6 Ps, really quite dynamic. And this part of the symphony, as we go into the development, I think is absolutely terrifying. I remember getting to know this work, perhaps 12, 13, something like that, and I remember it was the Bleakness Russian National Orchestra recording I got to know this symphony with. And I don't know if it's that recording in particular, but I used to remember falling asleep at the end of the second subject sometimes, and then suddenly, bang, we're into the development. I used to jump out of my bed, it's so scary hearing that. And it always has that effect on me when I hear that, because we go from 6 Ps at the end of the exposition, suddenly fortissimo into the development. And the beginning of the development goes like this. This fugato idea. Something like that anyway. That carries on, blazing away. It's a really thrilling development in this movement. We reach this climax where we have these descending scales again. So and so forth. And then following that we have a quote from the Russian Mass for the Dead. Death seems to haunt this symphony, particularly the first and last movements. Very brief quote, but very effective. It adds a moment of repose to the music. The development blazes away. We briefly hit the tonic again. We think perhaps this might be the recapitulation, but no, the music veers off again. This continual development based on that first subject. And eventually, right at the climax of the development, we have what I can only describe as an outpouring of grief. You can, like floods of tears. It's a moment of emotional exhaustion, perhaps. We have this idea. Real kind of sobbing effect in this music. We then have Tchaikovsky omits the first subject in the recapitulation. I have heard some people describe that brief return to the tonic in the development of the recapitulation, but I don't buy that personally. I think Tchaikovsky starts his recapitulation with the second subject. He's had enough of the first subject. And this time the second subject is in a rather radiant tonic major, B major. We have then a coda, and a coda is perhaps a sign of, there's a sense of resignation about this. A very calm way to end this turbulent music with that walking, descending bass line. The second movement, in contrast, is rather graceful. It could be something out of the Nutcracker, for instance. It's a beautiful waltz, essentially, in ternary form. The interesting thing about it, of course, is it's not in 3, it's in 5, it's in 5/4. And despite this choice of metre, Tchaikovsky makes it all sound so effortless and natural. The main A melody goes like this. So on. It's a really lovely melody. The contrasting B section, the middle section, harks back to something of the grief and the pain of the first movement. Really beautiful. I always get the sense there's something of the black dog on Tchaikovsky's shoulder here, you know, that sense of gloom and depression. Really beautiful. We have a return to the A section and a brief coda. The third movement is the only time in the symphony really where the clouds part for a significant length of time. It's a march and it's jubilant, triumphant, joyful music. It's essentially monothematic as well. We have really one main melody in this movement, which comes in each of the sections. This movement begins with a kind of feathery lightness, perhaps reminiscent of Mendelssohn's A Midsummer Night's Dream overture. It's like this. And we hear this beginning of a melody, which will become the march in the B section. Before we get to the B section, we have some more descending scales. And so on. And then we have a return to that, the lightness of the A section. We have a transition section based on the march idea, and then we have the march again, the B section in all its blazing glory with a fantastically exciting coda. And actually, I was at the proms this season and I saw this performed and everyone erupted into applause at the end of this movement, and I was thinking, well, do they know what happens next in this symphony? And that brings us on to the finale. because this is a real novelty in a symphony. I can't think of a symphony before this where a symphony ended on a slow movement. And Tchaikovsky does exactly that with this symphony, Adagio Lamentoso. And it's perhaps something taken up by the likes of Mahler. You think of perhaps Mahler's Ninth Symphony. So it's had a real influence on other composers, this movement. It's music of darkness, of bleakness, of despair. We have this cry from the heart. It's in ternary form, actually, again, with a coda. It's very simple to follow, but it's tragic music. So on, really painful music, full of suffering. Then we get to a contrasting middle section with this rather beautiful melody. Eventually we have this rather beautiful chorale in the brass, which is essentially an extended cadence into the coda. And the coda ends the music perhaps in a way reminiscent of the middle section of the second movement. Da, 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 da. But perhaps much darker and a much more sombre tone now. It's something like this. This offbeat figure on that pedal B all the way through. It's a truly memorable ending to a symphony. Please listen to this symphony with a sense of engagement and closeness. It really repays careful listening, like many other symphonies. And if it helps, the description for each of the movements are just below. Please like this video if you found it helpful, and please subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for any other videos, please put them in the comments below. Thank you for watching.